Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we'll go into the screen share. And we're going to look at verse 35 now, right? So you're to take all these different spices that you're mentioned here, not only the ones that are mentioned here, but according to oral tradition, there are a whole bunch of other spices that there were actually 11 different spices that were compounded together to make the frankincense. So, the asita ota, and you shall make it, ketoret, into incense. Rokach maaseh rokeach. So the compounded, right? The work of a perfumer, memulach tahor kodesh, salted, pure, sanctified. And we'll take a look at the Rashi on this. That's right here. So the part that was more difficult is, what do we mean memulach? It's from the word melach, meaning salt. And he says, but here it's interested, okay, Targumoy, Rashi likes the Targum, and in this sense, he understands, even though normally that would be mean salted, he says me'urav, blended. She'erav shchikatan yafeh, that when he pounds out these various spices, he does it so that they're beautifully blended. Yafeh. Ze im ze, one with the other. V'omer ani, and I say, shedomeh lo, and that it looks to me like in Jonah, vayiru hamalachim. So, vayareu hamalachim. So, in this case, we're talking about the sailors, right? That they were very fearful. This is from the book of Jonah, remember, where he gets on board the ship and there's this terrible storm. And I think this verse actually comes after they have cast him overboard, something like that, right? So, malach can also mean a sailor, but how that has to do with the word that he's talking about, we'll have to see. Okay, but let's see. And in Ezekiel, it's, here we go, melachecha v'chovalecha. So it could be that here he's talking, he says, Al Shem shemahafchin et hamayim. Okay. So a chovel is also a sailor, and that's from the word chevel, meaning a rope. So your sailors and your ropesmen, meaning in this case sailors, and here's how he explains it. Al Shem, this is because shemahapchin et hamayim b'metotot, because they turn over the water with their mishotot. And I have to think this has to do with their oars, manhigim et hasfina, and when they direct the boat, ka'adam, like a man, it's like, okay, so it's all together, right? So they turn over the water with their oars, and when they direct the boat, ka'adam shemahapech bekaf beitzim trufot, just as you make scrambled eggs. Okay, you're turning over the eggs and mixing them together, la'arvam, in order to mix them, im hamayim, with the water. The whole davar sha'adam rotzeh la'arev yafeh, and anything that a person wants to blend well, yafeh, blend very well, very finely, mahafcho be'etzba o be'bezech. He mixes it around, right? He turns it over and again with his finger or a bezech. I imagine, I don't have the translation here at this moment, whether it means a spoon. or with a spoon. Memulach tahor kodesh, right? So in other words, here we have to say this isn't salted. It means I thought it did, but the truth is that the spices do, I believe, require salt. We read that yesterday in the Mishnah, and it could be that. So I'm going to put in a translation here, if I can. There we are. Put this in. Give me a moment here. I'll make it a little bit larger. And put blended. And compare Rashi. One more moment. There we are. Thank you. That's a spoon. Okay. So he says, Mamulach yeh, v'tachor yeh, v'kodesh yeh. So he says that these three words here are actually individual statements regarding the spices. In other words, that at the end of this direction here, it's saying well blended, it's to be pure, and it's to be sanctified, like three different clauses. Onwards. V'shachakta mimenu hadek, and I believe it's pounded, okay, that you should pound from it very finely. V'natata mimena lifnei ha'edut be'ohel ma'ed, and you shall place some of it before the testimony, meaning the ark, right? Be'ohel ma'ed, in the tent of meeting. Asher yiva'ed lecha shama. In that, I think here we need to, the word asher is a pronoun that links one clause to another. So I'm thinking to translate it in as in that I will be present before you. I will witness before you there. But the idea is to a va'ad, for example, is a council. It's where people meet. And that's why we can also talk about, I will meet with you there. Kodash, Kodashim, it shall be most sanctified, holy of holies, Tieh lachem, it shall be. So we're talking here about the incense and how incredibly pure and sanctified and special this incense is. And this has something to do, and it's possible that because the incense sets up a cloud of some kind, it has to do with a sense of the divine presence here. So let's keep going here. V'natata mimenu v'gomer, and you shall put some of it. He ketoret shebechol yom v'yom. This is referring to the incense that was offered up each and every day. She'al mizbeach hapnimi, which is on the inner altar, shebehu be'ohel moed, which was in the tent of meeting. So you may recollect the gold altar, and that's where they put this incense. Excuse me. Asher iva'ed lecha shama, right? Where I will be present there to you. Kol mo'adei dibur she'ekba lecha. I hope I'm reading the Hebrew correctly, right? Ani lecha, ani kov'am le'oto makom. He says, all those, and I like to translate mo'ed as an appointment, right? As like taking, a doctor's appointment. In other words, specific times, dibur of communication, right? Where I'm going to be speaking to you, she'ekba lecha, which I will determine for you, that I will. So ekba kovea means to set up and make a specific time here. I am setting them up in that place, in that very place. So what Rashi seems to be doing is taking this Asher Ivaed, this Asher here, which, as you know, I was meditating and working with to try to understand it better. It's like saying it's an additional thought in that he's saying that this is the place where you can count on my being there with you. And it's possible that Rashi is saying Mo'adei Dibur to make it very clear that it is not a physical presence, but it's a presence where it uses the term speech because of communication, because that aspect of it. And let's see what else. Okay, going on. The Haktoret Asher Ta'aseh, and any incense which you make, b'matkunta, okay, with those particular proportions, right? With the ingredients and with those proportions, lo tu'asu lachem, you shall not make. In other words, lachem meaning for yourselves. You cannot make incense with this particular recipe for your own personal use. And that's part of its sanctity. Saying it's sacred definitely means that it has to be set apart in significant ways from things that you might use at other times. Kodesh tiyeh l'Hashem. It shall be sacred to you for God. So the only way this can be used is, in fact, in this very sacred context that's being mentioned here. And that's a wonderful way to start to understand this concept of sanctity. So you cannot understand sanctity if you don't understand distinction. And I had a professor of liturgy back in HEC when I was attending, Dr. Perachovsky, who used to love to define the word sacred simply as special, unique. So if you're talking about the Jewish people as an Am Kadosh, as a holy people, essentially it means distinguished and unique and special in those kinds of senses. And I think the reason why, for example, the betrothal ceremony is called Kiddushin has to do with the fact that in this particular case, a man and a woman, a man is designating this woman as having a unique relationship, that he has a unique relationship with her. V'haktoret, okay, so we did this here, Lamed Zion. There we go. B'matkunta, and he says, explains this word, because it's a little bit of an unusual word. B'minyan smamaneha, that means with the number of its spices, right? In the same number of spices, but referring also to the spices themselves. It's not just, I don't believe, it's just the fact that there were 11 spices. It's possible that one could take it to mean it on that particular level, but I think he's really meaning simply here that we're talking about the same recipe. Kodesh tiyeh l'Hashem, right? It shall be sacred to you for God. And he says, Shelo, that you should not, ta'asena ela lishmi, that you should not compound this particular incense except for my sake, God, of course, speaking. Ish asher ya'aseh kamoha lahariach ba, any man who makes this particular recipe, right, like it, literally, in order to inhale it, benichvat me'amav. It's so important that the punishment is kritut, means shall be cut off from his people. So it may sound like something not that big a deal to us, but apparently, at least, we might be able to understand why, have a better understanding. We talked about the effects of our olfactory glands and things, that it's in a very deep place in the brain, but also the very act of, when we say sanctifying God, means treating God in a way that we would not treat other things. And remember, so this is saying, in other words, that this person is doing it for their own enjoyment and their own pleasure making this. So there's obviously quite a bit that you can think about. Rashi, lahariach ba, to inhale it, to smell it. Aval oseh ota b'makdeka mishacha kedei limosra letzibur. And he says, but if it is permitted. So in other words, the fact that it's saying in order to inhale it is designating and limiting this particular law. And he goes on to say, but one who makes it the matkunta with its proportions, mishalcha, from, in other words, you're from your own personal possessions, right, from your own status, kedei lemosra letzibur. You can do it in order to hand it over. I think here it's litzbor, in order to store it. In other words, you could do that, and I believe here, without having studied more specifically the halachas of this particular of the incense, that he may be talking about that even though it won't be used up on the altar, it won't be used, and possibly, I don't know if they're saying here that whether that incense would be given then to the priests, or else it's simply saying, the punishment that is leveled off here is strictly for somebody who, in fact, does it to personally benefit. But if you're just doing this, and to why one would do it, of course, I'm wondering to myself, but in order to just save it, something, and to collect it, So the Mosra, I believe this is litzbor, to store it. Any questions before we move on? Okay, we'll go on then. All right. So now a new chapter, right? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses. Hashem spoke to Moses. Lemor, quote, right? As Dr. Barmash likes to translate. Here we go. Re'eh, see, karati b'shem. I have called out by name Betzalel ben Uri. Betzalel, this person by the name of Betzalel, son of Uri, ben Hur, I believe. Son of Hur, Lamate Yehuda, from the tribe of Judah. And we know, of course, that the reason for singling him out is to be in charge of the construction of the tabernacle and the various components. So, karati beshem. In other words, I have designated, I've singled out, I've called by name, that Betzalel was in fact someone that God appointed directly. He was divinely appointed, in other words. La'asot melachti et Betzalel. To perform my labor is Betzalel. I've called out Betzalel to do this, to do my work. V'amale otu ruach Elohim, and I have filled him with the spirit of God, of the divine. Bechokmah, in what sense? In wisdom, right? Uvitfuna, in understanding. Uvedat, and in knowledge. Uvechol malacha, and regarding all kinds of labor. The chokhmah. So what exactly do we mean by chokhmah? Ma she'adam shomea dvarim me'acherim v'lamed. It refers, chokhmah is what a person learns or hears these words, dvarim, from other people and learns them. In other words, chokhmah is what you gather from other sources, from other people, or from books. Uvitfuna, this is understanding. Mevin davar melibo mitoch dvarim shelamed. This tfuna is literally it means he understands something from his heart. In other words, from his own intelligence. mitoch dvarim shalamad, amongst the things that he has learned. So this is an ability to take what you learn externally from external sources, and in your own intelligence are able to process them and come up with ideas that are of your own, devising. Uvedat, interesting how he translates Ruach HaKodesh. Literally, it means the divine spirit. And I understand, I would tend to understand the divine spirit as referring to a sense of prophecy. So that's something else that comes from another source. So these three words refer to understanding, to wisdom, etc., that come from three different sources. Verse 4, Lachashov machashavot, and this is literally it means to think thoughts. But obviously you want to say, in other words, that this person is able to come up with designs and ideas, right? La'asot, to perform the zahav with gold, uva chesef, and with silver, uva nachoshet. And however you want to translate nachoshet, either bronze or copper or something like that. Let's see. All right, here we go. So it's interesting where he says lachashov machashavot, to think, right, of thoughts, literally. He says arigat maaseh choshev. Because that maaseh choshev is a phrase that's used earlier on in describing the curtains of the tabernacle. He says it refers to weaving, right? And that is to say, to do this very complex weaving. So again, Rashi's helping us understand the text more deeply. Uvecharoshet even, and this would be the carving of stone. Lemalot, in other words, this would be to fill in. Uvecharoshet eitz, and the carving of wood. La'asot b'chol melacha, to perform regarding all the labor of the tabernacle. And let's take a look here, as he says, Uvecharoshet. He says, Rashi says, Lashon umanut. This has the denotation of craftsmanship. And he gives examples, Isaiah chapter 40, all right? Charash chacham, the wise man is devising something, or it's referring to a wise or a very bright someone who is a fabricator, let's say. The Onkelos Piresh, and Onkelos explains it Vishana, which Pirushan. Okay, so again, I don't know if you have a translation in front of you there. I would have to look that up. But Lishanot generally means to learn or to teach or something. Do you have anything there? Do any of you have any translation of the Rashi there? Okay. So he says, Shu'omein avanim, he says that a craftsman of stone, right? A stone craftsman, or like a jeweler, right? Karui omein. He's known as a omein. V'charash eitz karui nagar. And he says, but a person who knows how to carve wood is known as a carpenter. That's the word for a carpenter. And I believe it comes from a word that a magera could be a chisel or a plane, right? Lemalot, to fill in. Lehoshiva b'mishbatzot. In other words, to place it in these little frames, the jewels that were, for example, that were in the choshen shelah. In other words, to place it in its frame, the milu'ah, when you're filling it in, lasot hamishbetzet, okay, in order to make this little frame, right, the square, lemidat, In other words, according to the measurement, Moshav ha'even v'aveha. In other words, to accommodate the situation, the place where the stone is put, and its thickness, I believe, is what this is saying. And with this, we will stop for this morning. Here. Let's see. Okay, so we have, excuse me, one moment. I actually have to go back and put it here. Right in here. And that's where we'll continue tomorrow. Okay, excuse me for all the things that are happening in, okay, in this. Stop the share. Okay. All right. Let's see. And I will go ahead and stop the recording.